20 minutes passed, then 30. I watched as other patients were called back, their names announced with warm professionalism. Mrs. Chen for her physical, Mr. Rodriguez for his follow-up, the Henderson family for their daughter's checkup. Madison made several phone calls, each one more pointed than the last. I couldn't hear the words, but her body language spoke volumes. Increasingly animated gestures, frustrated expressions, glances in my direction that suggested I was the subject of each conversation. Finally, she approached me again, this time accompanied by another woman in scrubs who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. "Ma'am," Madison said, her voice artificially sweet, "I've spoken with our nursing supervisor, and we're going to try to accommodate you. However, our flu vaccine program operates on a fee-for-service basis for non-established patients. The cost would be $250, payable today." I blinked. $250? For a flu shot? That includes the consultation fee, the vaccine, and the administration charge. It's quite reasonable for the level of care we provide. It wasn't reasonable. It was prohibitive. It was designed to make people like me go away quietly. "Your website lists flu shots at $65, I said. "That's for established patients with confirmed insurance pre-authorization," the nurse explained, not meeting my eyes. "Given the uncertainty with your coverage, we require payment up front." The waiting room had gone silent again. Every person within earshot was listening to this humiliating negotiation, this public discussion of my perceived inability to afford basic health care. I reached into my wallet. I had enough cash to cover it, barely. But it would mean skipping meals for the rest of the month. It would mean choosing between medication and groceries, between heating my apartment and putting gas in my car. But the alternative was leaving. Walking out in front of all these people who had already decided what kind of person I was, confirming their assumptions about my place in their world. "Fine," I said, counting out bills that represented far more than their monetary value. The nurse took my money with obvious discomfort. "We'll need you to fill out these forms," she said, handing me a clipboard thick with paperwork. "And you'll need to wait in the general seating area, not the premium section." I hadn't even realized there was a distinction. Apparently, the chairs near the windows, the ones with the better lighting and the magazines that weren't 6 months old, were reserved for a different class of patient. I moved to a chair near the back, next to the restrooms and the vending machine, and began filling out forms that asked for information I'd already provided over the phone. Questions about my medical history, my current medications, my emergency contacts. Under occupation, I paused. For 2 decades, I would have written United States Army. Now, technically unemployed due to medical retirement, I wasn't sure what to put. Retired, I finally wrote, leaving it vague. Under military service, there was a small checkbox. I checked it and wrote USA, 1995-2018, Colonel. The forms asked for my insurance information again, my preferred pharmacy, my reason for today's visit. They asked about allergies and medications and whether I'd ever had an adverse reaction to vaccines. They didn't ask about my Bronze Star. They didn't ask about the roadside bomb in Kandahar that had damaged my hearing and given me the traumatic brain injury that required ongoing treatment. They didn't ask about the soldiers whose lives I'd saved, or the missions I'd led, or the sacrifices I'd made in service to my country. They saw what they chose to see, and what they chose to see was someone who didn't measure up to their standards. An hour passed, then another. Patients who had arrived after me were called back. Families who had scheduled appointments after mine were seen and discharged. The premium seating area turned over twice while I sat in my corner, paperwork completed, money paid, invisible despite taking up space. A little girl, maybe 7 years old, wandered away from her mother and approached me. She had curious eyes and wore a dress that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. "Are you a soldier?" she asked, pointing to something on my jacket that must have caught her attention. Before I could answer, her mother swooped in, taking the child's hand and pulling her away. "Sophia, don't bother the woman," she said, not looking at me. "Come sit with Mommy." The child looked back over her shoulder as she was led away, still curious, still innocent enough not to understand the social barriers that adults erected without even thinking about them. I closed my eyes and tried to remember why I was here. The flu shot was important. My immune system, compromised by treatments for the traumatic brain injury, made me vulnerable to infections that could be serious or even life-threatening. Dr. Peterson had been clear about that. But sitting in that waiting room, surrounded by the casual cruelty of assumptions and judgments, I wondered if it was worth it. If any of this was worth it. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had spent my career defending the rights and freedoms of people who now looked at me like I was something unpleasant they'd stepped in. I had taken an oath to support and defend the Constitution, to protect American citizens against all enemies, foreign and domestic. I never imagined that one day those same citizens would see me as the enemy simply because I didn't fit their image of who belonged in their world. Madison called another name, Mrs. Patterson for Dr. Martinez. An elderly woman in pearls and cashmere walked past me without a glance, her designer handbag swinging gently at her side. I checked my watch. 2 hours. I had been waiting for 2 hours for a medical appointment that should have taken 15 minutes. My phone buzzed. A text from my daughter in California, asking how I was doing, if I needed anything. She'd been worried about me since my discharge from the Army, since the medical retirement that had upended everything I thought I knew about my life and my purpose. I typed back that I was fine, that everything was going well. The lie came easily. I'd become good at lies that protected other people from worrying about me. Another patient was called, then another. The waiting room began to empty as the lunch hour approached. Soon, it was just me and a man in an expensive suit who kept checking his phone and sighing dramatically about the wait. He'd been there for 20 minutes. I'd been there for 2 hours and 15 minutes. Madison approached me again, her expression carefully neutral. "Ma'am, I'm afraid we're going to have to reschedule. Dr. Reeves has been called away for an emergency, and our other providers are fully booked." The words hit me like a physical blow. After everything, after the humiliation, the money, the waiting, the judgment, when can we reschedule? I asked. "Let me check," she said, though she made no move toward her computer. "It might be several weeks. Our flu season schedule is quite full." Several weeks. By then, flu season would be in full swing. By then, the shot would be less effective, harder to find. I paid. "Yes, and we'll be happy to apply that payment to your rescheduled appointment." I stood up slowly, gathering my things. The man in the expensive suit was called back at that exact moment, his name announced with a kind of warm professionalism that had been absent from every interaction I'd had. As I walked toward the door, I heard Madison on the phone again. "Yes, that's right," she was saying. "The situation has been resolved. No disruption to the other patients." I was the situation. I was the disruption. I pushed through the glass doors and into the parking lot, where my Honda sat alone among the luxury vehicles like a reminder of everything I didn't have, everything I couldn't afford, everything that made me different from the people inside. The autumn air was colder now, cutting through my faded jacket and settling into the old injuries that never quite healed. I sat in my car for a long moment, hands shaking slightly from anger or exhaustion, or the simple weight of being dismissed so completely. 23 years of service. 23 years of putting my life on the line for people who couldn't even see me as human enough to deserve basic medical care. I started the engine and pulled out of the parking lot, past the sign that read Millbrook Family Health Center, where excellence meets compassion. I had $30 left in my wallet and nowhere else to go for the flu shot I needed. But I wasn't giving up. Not yet. I had learned a long time ago that sometimes the hardest battles aren't fought with weapons or strategy. Sometimes they're fought with persistence and dignity, and the simple refusal to disappear just because someone wants you to. I drove toward home, past the county health department Madison had mentioned, and I made a decision. I would come back tomorrow. I would demand the appointment I had paid for. I would stand my ground until someone recognized that I belonged here as much as anyone else. Because that's what you do when you've sworn an oath to never leave a soldier behind, even when that soldier is yourself. That night I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Madison's dismissive smile, heard the whispers of patients who had decided my worth based on my appearance. I replayed every moment, every word, wondering if I should have pushed back harder, spoken up more forcefully, demanded the respect I had earned through decades of service. But I knew better. I knew that raising my voice would have only confirmed their assumptions about me. The angry woman who didn't belong, the troublemaker who disrupted their peaceful, affluent bubble. By morning I had made my decision. I was going back. I dressed more carefully this time, choosing my best pair of slacks and a sweater that didn't show its age as obviously as my jacket. I found a blazer in the back of my closet, navy blue with gold buttons that reminded me of my dress uniform. It was too big now, my frame having shrunk since leaving the service, but it would have to do. I arrived at the Millbrook Family Health Center at exactly 9 o'clock when they opened. The parking lot was nearly empty, just a few cars belonging to staff members. I chose a spot near the entrance, between a silver Mercedes and a black BMW, and tried to convince myself I belonged there. The waiting room was quiet in the early morning light, the leather chairs empty, the coffee station unstaffed. Madison wasn't at the reception desk yet. Instead, an older woman with kind eyes and graying hair smiled at me as I approached. "Good morning," she said warmly. "How can I help you?" "I'm Patricia Hayes. I was here yesterday for a flu shot appointment, but there was some confusion. I need to reschedule." The woman, whose nameplate read Eleanor, pulled up something on her computer. "Let me see what I can find." "Hayes, you said." "Yes. I had an appointment with Dr. Reeves that was canceled at the last minute." Eleanor frowned as she scrolled through the system. "I'm seeing a Patricia Hayes in our system, but there's a note here that's unusual." She looked up at me with concern. "It says your appointment was canceled due to insurance verification issues, but I can see right here that your Blue Cross Blue Shield federal plan is active and in good standing." My stomach tightened. "What does that mean?" "It means someone made an error yesterday, and I'm very sorry about that." Eleanor's fingers flew over the keyboard. "Dr. Reeves has an opening at 10:15 this morning. Would that work for you?" Relief flooded through me. "Yes, absolutely." "Perfect. And Mrs. Hayes, I want to apologize for whatever happened yesterday. That's not how we treat our patients here, especially not our veterans." She gestured to something on her screen. "I see you served 23 years in the Army. Thank you for your service." I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes. Such simple words, but after yesterday's humiliation, they meant everything. Eleanor printed out a new appointment slip and handed it to me. "You can have a seat anywhere you'd like. Dr. Reeves should be ready for you shortly." I chose a chair near the windows, in what Madison had called the premium seating area. The morning sun felt warm on my face, and for the first time in 24 hours, I allowed myself to relax. That peace lasted exactly 12 minutes. "Excuse me." Madison's voice cut through my calm like a knife. She had arrived for her shift and spotted me immediately. "Ma'am, you're back." "I have an appointment." I held up Eleanor's printout. Madison's perfectly applied makeup couldn't hide her irritation. "Let me check on that." She marched to the reception desk, where I could see her having an animated conversation with Eleanor. Their voices were low, but their body language spoke volumes. Eleanor pointing at her computer screen, Madison shaking her head, both women growing more agitated. Other patients began to arrive. A young mother with a toddler, both dressed in designer clothes, an elderly man in a cashmere coat, a woman about my age wearing jewelry that probably cost more than my car. They all gave me curious glances as they checked in with Eleanor, their gazes lingering on my too large blazer and sensible shoes. Madison returned to me with a tight smile. Mrs. Hayes, there seems to be some confusion about your appointment. Dr. Reeves is actually fully booked this morning. Eleanor just confirmed my 10:15 slot. Eleanor made an error. She's new to our scheduling system. Madison's voice carried just loud enough for the other patients to hear. I'm afraid we'll need to reschedule you again. The young mother with the toddler whispered something to the elderly man in cashmere. They both looked at me with expressions that ranged from pity to annoyance. I paid for this appointment yesterday, I said, my voice steady, despite the anger building in my chest. Yes, and as I explained, that payment can be applied to a future appointment, but today simply isn't possible. Why? The question hung in the air. Madison's smile faltered slightly. As I said, Dr. Reeves is fully booked. Then I'll see another provider. All of our providers are fully booked. I'll wait for a cancellation. Madison's patience was wearing thin. Ma'am, we cannot guarantee that any cancellations will occur, and even if they do, you would not be our first priority. There it was. The truth beneath all the polite deflection. I would not be their first priority. I would never be their first priority. What exactly are you saying? I asked. Madison glanced around the waiting room, clearly uncomfortable with the attention our conversation was drawing. Perhaps we could discuss this privately? No, I think everyone should hear this. You're saying that despite having an appointment, despite having valid insurance, despite having paid your inflated fee yesterday, I cannot receive basic medical care at this clinic. Is that correct? The waiting room had gone completely silent. Even the toddler seemed to sense the tension and stopped his babbling. Ma'am, please lower your voice. You're creating a disturbance. I'm asking a simple question. And I've explained our position clearly. We cannot accommodate you today. That's when Eleanor stepped in. Madison, Dr. Reeves specifically asked me to schedule Mrs. Hayes for 10:15. He has an opening. Madison's face flushed. Eleanor, as front desk supervisor, I make the final scheduling decisions. But Dr. Reeves will see the patients I approve. That's how this clinic operates. The mask had slipped. Madison wasn't following doctor's orders or clinic policy. She was making a personal decision to exclude me, and she was willing to do it in front of a room full of witnesses. I stood up slowly. I understand now. Good. The county health department, I understand that this isn't about my appointment, my insurance, or scheduling conflicts. My voice carried the authority I'd learned commanding troops in combat zones. This is about you deciding that someone like me doesn't belong in a place like this. Madison's face went white, then red. Ma'am, that's absolutely not... It's about my jacket being too old, my car being too cheap, my appearance not meeting your standards for the kind of patients you want to serve. I resent that accusation, and I resent being treated like a second-class citizen in my own country. The waiting room was frozen. The young mother clutched her toddler closer. The elderly man stared openly. The woman in expensive jewelry had her phone out, possibly recording. Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. On what grounds? You're disrupting other patients. I'm standing up for myself. If that's disruptive, maybe you should ask why. Madison looked around desperately, as if hoping someone would intervene on her behalf. But the other patients were watching with the uncomfortable fascination of people witnessing a car accident. Security, Madison called toward the back offices. You're calling security on a patient with a confirmed appointment because she asked for equal treatment? I'm calling security because you're being belligerent and refusing to leave when asked. That's when I heard the voice behind me. Quiet, calm, but carrying an edge of steel that reminded me of the best officers I'd served under. Excuse me, but I couldn't help overhearing this conversation. I turned to see a woman in her 50s, silver hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, wearing scrubs and a white coat. Her badge identified her as Dr. Sarah Martinez, medical director. "Dr. Martinez," said Madison, relief flooding her voice. "This patient is causing a disturbance and refusing to leave." Dr. Martinez looked from Madison to me, taking in the scene with sharp, intelligent eyes. "Mrs. Hayes, is it?" "Colonel Hayes, actually. Retired." Something shifted in Dr. Martinez's expression. "Colonel, I see. And what seems to be the problem here?" "Dr. Martinez? This patient has been—" "Dr. Martinez. I was asking Colonel Hayes," Dr. Martinez said firmly. I took a breath, choosing my words carefully. "I had an appointment yesterday that was canceled at the last minute after I paid a $250 fee. Eleanor rescheduled me for 10:15 this morning with Dr. Reeves, but Madison is refusing to honor that appointment." Dr. Martinez pulled out her phone and scrolled through something. "I showed Dr. Reeves has a 10:15 opening. Why is this appointment being denied?" Madison's confidence wavered. "There are insurance issues." "What kind of insurance issues?" "Well, the patient's coverage is complicated." Dr. Martinez looked at her screen again. "Blue Cross Blue Shield Federal Employee Plan. That's one of the most straightforward insurance plans we deal with. What's complicated about it?" Madison opened and closed her mouth like a fish out of water. Dr. Martinez turned to Eleanor. "Mrs. Chen, please pull up Colonel Hayes's file." Eleanor's fingers flew over the keyboard. "Here it is, doctor. Insurance is active and current. Prior authorizations are on file for her ongoing treatment at the VA." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. No billing issues or outstanding balances. And her appointment? Scheduled for 10:15 with Dr. Reeves. He specifically requested the scheduling after reviewing her medical history. Dr. Martinez's expression darkened. She looked around the waiting room, noting the uncomfortable faces, the whispered conversations, the obvious tension. "Madison, step into my office, now." "Dr. Martinez, I can explain, now." As Madison hurried toward the back offices, Dr. Martinez turned to me. "Colonel Hayes, I apologize for this situation. Please, have a seat. Dr. Reeves will be with you shortly." "Thank you." But she wasn't finished. Dr. Martinez looked around the waiting room, making eye contact with each of the other patients. When she spoke, her voice carried clearly to every corner of the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want to address what just happened here. Colonel Hayes is a retired Army officer who served our country for 23 years. She has a confirmed appointment, valid insurance, and every right to receive medical care at this clinic with dignity and respect." The young mother shifted uncomfortably in her seat. The elderly man suddenly found his magazine fascinating. "What you witnessed was unacceptable. It does not represent the values of this clinic or the medical profession. Every patient who walks through our doors deserves equal treatment, regardless of their appearance, their perceived economic status, or any other factor unrelated to their medical needs." Dr. Martinez paused, letting her words sink in. "Colonel, would you mind if I asked about your service?" "Iraq and Afghanistan. Multiple deployments. I retired as a result of injuries sustained in a roadside bombing." "And your current treatment?" "TBI therapy at the VA. My immune system is compromised, which is why Dr. Peterson referred me here for the flu vaccination." Dr. Martinez nodded grimly. "So not only were you denied basic medical care, but you were denied care that could be life-threatening to go without." The waiting room was dead silent now. I could hear the hum of the air conditioning, the distant sound of phones ringing in the back offices, the soft breathing of people trying to process what they were hearing. "Colonel, I'm going to personally ensure that you receive not just your flu vaccination today, but a complete review of your care needs. If there's anything this clinic can do to support your ongoing treatment, we will do it." "That's very kind, but unnecessary. I just want the appointment I paid for." "You'll get that and more. And Colonel?" Dr. Martinez's voice softened slightly. "Thank you for your service." and thank you for your patience with our failures today." She turned back to the waiting room. "For the rest of you, I hope this serves as a reminder that heroism doesn't always wear a uniform, and sacrifice doesn't always announce itself. The person sitting next to you might have given years of their life for your freedom. They deserve our respect, not our judgment." The young mother was crying now, quiet tears streaming down her face. The elderly man had put down his magazine and was staring at me with something that looked like shame. Dr. Martinez disappeared into the back offices, and within minutes, Madison emerged, her face red and tear-streaked. She walked directly to me. "Colonel Hayes, I owe you an apology. My behavior was inexcusable. I made assumptions that were wrong and hurtful, and I treated you in a way that dishonors both your service and my profession." I looked at her for a long moment. The anger was still there. The hurt was still raw, but I could see genuine remorse in her eyes. "Thank you," I said simply. Madison nodded and walked back to the reception desk where Eleanor was waiting with a supportive hand on her shoulder. A few minutes later, a tall man in a white coat emerged from the back offices. "Colonel Hayes, I'm Dr. Reeves. I'm so sorry for the delay." As I stood to follow him, the elderly man in cashmere approached me. "Ma'am, I'm Robert Chen. My father served in World War II. He would be ashamed of how I sat here and said nothing while you were treated that way." The young mother was next. "I'm sorry," she whispered, still crying. "I should have spoken up. My husband is deployed overseas right now, and if someone treated me the way they treated you—" She couldn't finish the sentence. One by one, the other patients approached me. Apologies, expressions of gratitude, promises to do better. The woman with the expensive jewelry pressed a business card into my hand. "If you ever need anything, legal help, advocacy, anything, what happened here was wrong." Dr. Reeves waited patiently as each person spoke. When they were finished, he gestured toward the examination rooms. "Shall we, Colonel?" As we walked down the hallway, I heard Dr. Martinez's voice from her office, calm but firm. "Madison, discrimination of any kind is grounds for immediate termination. You will undergo sensitivity training, you will attend workshops on unconscious bias, and you will write a formal apology letter to Colonel Hayes. If anything like this ever happens again, you're done. Do you understand?" Dr. Reeves closed the examination room door behind us and gestured to the chair. "Colonel, before we begin, I want you to know that I specifically requested your appointment this morning. I reviewed your medical file and your service record." "My service record?" He smiled. "I'm former Navy myself. When I saw your credentials, your deployments, your commendations, I made sure you were scheduled with me personally. A Bronze Star recipient deserves the best care we can provide." I'd felt the last of my defenses crumble. After 24 hours of fighting to be seen, to be respected, to be treated like a human being, here was someone who not only saw me, but honored what I had given. "Thank you," I said. And this time, I didn't try to hide the tears.
"No, Colonel. Thank you for your service, for your sacrifice, and for standing up for yourself today. What happened out there was wrong, but the way you handled it with dignity and strength, that's exactly what I'd expect from someone who wore the uniform for 23 years. He prepared the flu vaccine with practiced efficiency, but his attention was entirely focused on me. "Tell me about your TBI treatment. Are you satisfied with your care at the VA?" "It's adequate." "Adequate isn't good enough. You've given more than enough. It's time someone gave back to you." As he administered the vaccine, Dr. Reeves talked about his own service, about the challenges veterans faced in civilian healthcare, about his commitment to ensuring that those who served received the best possible care. "Colonel, I want to establish you as a regular patient here. No more obstacles, no more discrimination, no more fighting for basic respect. You've earned better than that." When the appointment was finished, he walked me back to the waiting room personally. The other patients looked up as we emerged, their expressions respectful now, apologetic. Dr. Martinez was waiting at the reception desk. "Colonel Hayes, how did everything go?" "Excellent, thank you." "Good. Eleanor has scheduled your follow-up appointments and entered you into our system as a priority patient. Any future visits will be expedited." She handed me a card. "This is my direct number. If you ever experience any issues here or anywhere else with your health care, you call me immediately." As I prepared to leave, Robert Chen stood up. "Colonel, if I may, my daughter works for the local newspaper. Would you be willing to speak with her about what happened here today?" I considered it. Part of me wanted to just disappear, to pretend this had never happened, to avoid any more attention or conflict. But then I thought about other veterans who might face similar discrimination, other people who might be judged and dismissed because they didn't look prosperous enough or important enough to deserve respect. "Yes," I said, "I'll speak with her." The young mother approached again. "Colonel, I know this might sound strange, but my daughter's class is studying veterans next week. Would you be willing to come speak to them? I think they need to learn that heroes don't always look like what they expect." More offers followed: speaking engagements, interviews, invitations to share my story. Each person who had sat silently while I was humiliated now wanted to make amends, to transform their shame into action. As I walked toward the door, I noticed something different in the way I carried myself. My shoulders were straighter, my steps more confident. For the first time since leaving the Army, I felt like Colonel Hayes again. Dr. Martinez walked me to the parking lot personally. "Colonel, I need you to know that changes will be made because of what happened today. Training, policies, accountability measures. Your courage in speaking up will help other patients who might not have your strength to advocate for themselves." That's all I wanted, for this not to happen to someone else. It won't, I promise you that. As I drove home, I thought about the morning's events, the humiliation, the confrontation, the vindication. The way people's attitudes had shifted once they understood who I really was, what I had given, what I had earned. But mostly, I thought about Dr. Martinez's words. Heroes don't always wear uniforms. Sacrifice doesn't always announce itself. I had spent so many years defining myself by my rank, my service, my role in the military. I had forgotten that my worth wasn't dependent on other people recognizing it. I was still Colonel Hayes even when no one saluted. I was still a veteran, even when no one thanked me. I was still deserving of respect, even when others chose not to give it. The flu shot itself was insignificant. A quick injection, a brief moment of prevention against illness. But what happened in that clinic was something larger. A reminder that dignity isn't given, it's claimed. That respect isn't granted, it's demanded. That sometimes the most important battles are fought not with weapons or strategy, but with the simple refusal to be invisible. I parked in front of my apartment and sat for a moment in the silence. Tomorrow, I would call Robert Chen's daughter. I would share my story, not because I wanted attention or sympathy, but because stories like mine needed to be told. Because somewhere, another veteran was sitting in another waiting room, being judged by their appearance rather than their character. Because somewhere another person was being told they didn't belong in a place where they had every right to be. Because dignity defended anywhere is dignity defended everywhere. And because sometimes one voice raised in the right moment can change everything that follows. 3 days later, my phone rang at 7 in the morning. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but something told me to answer. "Colonel Hayes?" "This is Jennifer Chen from the Millbrook Herald. My father gave me your number. He said you might be willing to speak with me about an incident at the Family Health Center. I was sitting in my kitchen, coffee growing cold in front of me, watching the sunrise through my small window. What did your father tell you? That he witnessed something that changed his perspective on how we treat veterans in our community, that he was ashamed of his own silence when someone who had served our country was being discriminated against. Jennifer Chen turned out to be a thorough journalist. She spent 2 hours on the phone with me, asking careful questions, taking detailed notes, following up on every aspect of what had happened. She wanted to understand not just the incident itself, but the broader context of veteran healthcare, the challenges faced by those transitioning from military to civilian life, the invisible barriers that kept people from accessing the care they needed. Colonel, I want to establish you as a regular patient here. No more obstacles, no more discrimination, no more fighting for basic respect. You've earned better than that. When the appointment was finished, he walked me back to the waiting room personally. The other patients looked up as we emerged, their expressions respectful now, apologetic. Dr. Martinez was waiting at the reception desk. Colonel Hayes, how did everything go? Excellent, thank you. Good. Eleanor has scheduled your follow-up appointments and entered you into our system as a priority patient. Any future visits will be expedited. She handed me a card. This is my direct number. If you ever experience any issues here or anywhere else with your healthcare, you call me immediately. As I prepared to leave, Robert Chen stood up. Colonel, if I may, my daughter works for the local newspaper. Would you be willing to speak with her about what happened here today? I considered it. Part of me wanted to just disappear, to pretend this had never happened, to avoid any more attention or conflict. But then I thought about other veterans who might face similar discrimination, other people who might be judged and dismissed because they didn't look prosperous enough or important enough to deserve respect. Yes, I said. I'll speak with her. The young mother approached again. Colonel, I know this might sound strange, but my daughter's class is studying veterans next week. Would you be willing to come speak to them? I think they need to learn that heroes don't always look like what they expect. More offers followed. Speaking engagements, interviews, invitations to share my story. Each person who had sat silently while I was humiliated now wanted to make amends, to transform their shame into action. As I walked toward the door, I noticed something different in the way I carried myself. My shoulders were straighter, my steps more confident. For the first time since leaving the Army, I felt like Colonel Hayes again. Dr. Martinez walked me to the parking lot. Colonel, I need you to know that changes will be made because of what happened today. Training, policies, accountability measures. Your courage in speaking up will help other patients who might not have your strength to advocate for themselves. That's all I wanted, for this not to happen to someone else. It won't, I promise you that. As I drove home, I thought about the morning's events, the humiliation, the confrontation, the vindication, the way people's attitudes had shifted once they understood who I really was, what I had given, what I had earned. But mostly, I thought about Dr. Martinez's words. Heroes don't always wear uniforms. Sacrifice doesn't always announce itself. I had spent so many years defining myself by my rank, my service, my role in the military. I had forgotten that my worth wasn't dependent on other people recognizing it. I was still Colonel Hayes even when no one saluted. I was still a veteran, even when no one thanked me. I was still deserving of respect, even when others chose not to give it. The flu shot itself was insignificant. A quick injection, a brief moment of prevention against illness. But what happened in that clinic...
Dr. Martinez, I appreciate the gesture, but I'm not sure I'm qualified for that kind of role.
You're exactly qualified. You understand the veteran experience from the inside. You've demonstrated the courage to speak truth to power, and you've shown grace under pressure that most people could never manage. I thought about it for days. The position would give me purpose again, a way to use my experience to help others. But it would also mean returning regularly to the place where I'd been humiliated, working alongside people who had witnessed my lowest moment. In the end, it was a phone call from a stranger that decided me. "Ma'am, this is Sergeant Martinez, retired Marines. I read about what happened to you in the paper." His voice was rough, emotional. "I wanted you to know that the same thing happened to my wife at that clinic 6 months ago. She was too embarrassed to fight it, too tired to push back. She just left and never went back." "Is she getting the care she needs now?" "No, ma'am. She's been putting off medical appointments because she's afraid of being treated that way again. But after reading your story, she called and made an appointment with Dr. Reeves. She said if a colonel could stand up for herself, maybe she could too." That night, I called Dr. Martinez and accepted the position. My first day as Veterans Advocate at Millbrook Family Health Center was unlike anything I'd experienced in my military career. Dr. Martinez introduced me to the staff during their morning meeting, explaining my role and the circumstances that had led to its creation. The room was quiet as she spoke. Madison was there, sitting in the back, her eyes red-rimmed and focused on her hands. When Dr. Martinez finished, she asked if I wanted to say anything. I stood up slowly, looking around the room at faces that ranged from curious to concerned to genuinely apologetic. "I'm not here for revenge or to point fingers. I'm here because healthcare should be a place where everyone feels safe and respected, regardless of their background or appearance. What happened to me could happen to any veteran, any person who doesn't fit someone's idea of what a typical patient should look like. My job is to make sure it doesn't happen again." After the meeting, Madison approached me hesitantly. "Colonel Hayes, I've been thinking about what to say to you for days. I know an apology isn't enough, but I need you to know how sorry I am. I've worked in healthcare for 8 years, and I've never treated anyone the way I treated you." "What happened, Madison? Help me understand." She took a shaky breath. I think I got caught up in the image of this place, the prestige, the wealthy patients, the idea that we were somehow better than other clinics. When I saw you, I made assumptions based on your clothes, your car, and I acted on those assumptions without thinking about who you might actually be. And now I'm ashamed. My grandfather was a veteran. He would be horrified by what I did." She wiped her eyes. "I've enrolled in sensitivity training on my own time. I've been volunteering at the VA hospital to try to understand the veteran community better. I'm trying to do better." Over the following weeks, I threw myself into the new role. I developed relationships with local veteran organizations, created informational materials about healthcare rights, and established a direct line for veterans who encountered problems accessing care. The changes of the clinic were immediate and visible. Staff members began asking patients about military service during intake. Veterans were offered priority scheduling for urgent needs. A small lounge area was designated as a quiet space for patients dealing with anxiety or PTSD. But the most significant change was cultural. The incident had forced everyone to examine their own biases, their own assumptions about worth and belonging. Conversations I overheard in the hallways were different now, more thoughtful, more inclusive, more aware of the stories that might be hidden beneath someone's appearance. 2 months into my new role, I was working late when Dr. Reeves knocked on my office door. "Colonel, there's someone here who'd like to meet you." I followed him to the lobby, where a woman in her 40s stood nervously near the reception desk. She wore a faded denim jacket and jeans that had seen better days, and her eyes held the same weariness I remembered feeling that first day. "Colonel Hayes? I'm Maria Santos. I served in the Navy, deployed to the Persian Gulf twice. Dr. Reeves said you might be able to help me." "Of course. What's going on?" "I've been putting off a mammogram for 2 years because I can't afford to take time off work, and the last time I tried to schedule one at a clinic, they made me feel like I was begging for charity." Her voice dropped. "When I read about what happened to you, I realized I wasn't the only one who'd been made to feel that way." I spent an hour with Maria,
helping her navigate the scheduling system, explaining her insurance benefits, and connecting her with financial assistance programs she didn't know existed. But more importantly, I walked her through the process, introduced her to the staff, and made sure she felt welcome and respected. As she left that evening, Maria turned back to me. "Colonel, you've given me something I thought I'd lost." "What's that?" "The belief that I deserve to be treated with dignity. Thank you." The stories multiplied. Veterans who had been avoiding medical care because of past humiliations, patients who had been dismissed or ignored because they didn't look prosperous enough, people who had internalized shame about their economic circumstances and had stopped advocating for themselves. Each person who came through my office reminded me why this work mattered. It wasn't just about veterans, though that was my specific focus. It was about creating a healthcare environment where everyone felt worthy of care and respect. 6 months after starting the position, I received an invitation that surprised me. The Connecticut Veterans Affairs Office wanted me to speak at their annual conference about healthcare accessibility for veterans. Standing at the podium in front of 300 healthcare providers, veterans advocates, and government officials, I thought about how far I'd come from that morning when Madison had told me I didn't belong. 6 months ago, I was discriminated against at a medical clinic because someone looked at my clothes and decided I couldn't afford to be there. That experience could have broken me. Instead, it became the foundation for a new mission. I told them about the changes at Millbrook, about the veterans who had found their voice again, about the cultural shift that happened when people were forced to confront their own biases. Healthcare discrimination doesn't just affect the individual patient. It affects families, communities, entire populations who stop seeking care because they've been made to feel unwelcome. When we create barriers based on appearance or perceived economic status, we fail in our fundamental mission to heal. After my speech, a woman approached me. She introduced herself as Dr. Patricia Williams, Director of Veterans Health Services for the state. "Colonel Hayes, we've been following your work at Millbrook. We'd like to offer you a consulting position to help implement similar programs at healthcare facilities throughout Connecticut." The offer was tempting, but I realized I wasn't finished at Millbrook yet. There was still work to do, relationships to build, systems to refine. "Thank you, Dr. Williams, but I think I'm needed where I am for now. However, I'd be happy to share our model with other facilities that are interested in implementing change." That led to monthly workshops where I trained healthcare staff from across the region about unconscious bias, veteran issues, and creating inclusive environments. The program grew beyond veterans to address discrimination against all marginalized populations. "Colonel, I have something to show you." She pulled out a folder thick with papers. "Patient satisfaction surveys from the past 12 months. Our scores for respectful treatment and inclusive care have increased by 40%. "That's wonderful. But there's more. We've received commendations from 3 veteran organizations, been designated as a veteran-friendly healthcare provider by the state, and our staff turnover has decreased significantly." She paused, smiling. "People want to work in an environment where dignity is prioritized." I looked around the cafe, watching patients from all backgrounds sitting together comfortably. A veteran in a wheelchair chatted with an elderly woman in designer clothes. A young mother with her children sat next to a man who appeared to be homeless. The atmosphere was welcoming, inclusive, exactly what healthcare should be. "What's most important to me," Dr. Martinez continued, "is that we've prevented countless incidents like yours. Your advocacy has created a ripple effect that extends far beyond our clinic." That evening, I received a phone call from an unexpected source. "Colonel Hayes, this is Captain Jennifer Morrison, U.S. Army. I'm calling from Walter Reed Medical Center." "How can I help you, Captain?" "Ma'am, we've been following your work in Connecticut. We'd like to invite you to consult on a new program we're developing to help transitioning veterans navigate civilian healthcare systems." The conversation led to a part-time consulting contract with the military medical system, developing training programs for veterans entering civilian life and healthcare providers serving veteran populations. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. I was working late one evening when Eleanor knocked on my office door. "Colonel, there's a young man here who insists on seeing you. Says it's personal." I followed her to the lobby, where a tall young man in an army uniform stood at attention. When he saw me, he snapped to attention and saluted. "Colonel Hayes, ma'am, Sergeant First Class David Chen, currently stationed at Fort Bragg." I returned his salute, confused. "Sergeant Chen, what can I do for you?" "Ma'am, you probably don't remember me, but you spoke to my high school class 2 years ago about veteran issues. I was a senior, wasn't sure what I wanted to do with my life." A memory stirred. "Valley Regional High School. You asked about military service." "Yes, ma'am." "Your talk about serving something bigger than yourself, about standing up for what's right even when it's difficult, inspired me to enlist. I wanted to thank you personally." "Sergeant, your service honors us all. Thank you." "Ma'am, there's something else. My grandfather, Robert Chen, the man who was in the clinic that day when you were mistreated, he passed away last month." My heart sank. Robert had become a regular volunteer at veteran events, using his experience that day to advocate for better treatment of service members. "I'm so sorry for your loss." "Thank you, ma'am." "But before he died, he asked me to give you something." Sergeant Chan reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn medal. This was his father's Bronze Star from World War II. "Grandpa said you deserve to have it because you fought a different kind of battle and won with the same courage his father showed in combat." I stared at the medal, overwhelmed by the gesture. "Sergeant, I can't accept this. This belongs to your family." "Ma'am, my grandfather was very clear. He said his shame at staying silent that day taught him something important about moral courage. He said you reminded his whole family what it means to stand up for what's right, even when it's uncomfortable." That night, I sat in my apartment holding Robert Chen's father's Bronze Star, thinking about the interconnectedness of service and sacrifice across generations. A World War II Veterans Medal, passed down through a family that had learned about moral courage from witnessing mine. The irony wasn't lost on me. The incident that had made me feel most invisible had ultimately made me more visible than I'd ever been in uniform. The moment when I'd felt most powerless had led to more influence that I'd wielded as a colonel. But the real victory wasn't in the recognition or the career opportunities or even the systemic changes we'd implemented. It was in the individual stories. Maria Santos, who now regularly got preventative care without fear or shame. The homeless veteran who knew he could come to our clinic and be treated with dignity. The dozens of healthcare workers who had examined their own biases and committed to doing better. On the second anniversary of the incident, Dr. Martinez organized the small ceremony to dedicate a new mission statement for the clinic. Carved into marble in the lobby, it read, "Healthcare is a human right. Dignity is non-negotiable. Every person who enters these doors will be treated with respect, compassion, and equality." During the ceremony, Madison approached me. She had thrived in her new role, becoming one of our most effective advocates for inclusive care. "Colonel, I need you to know that what happened 2 years ago was the worst thing I'd ever done, but it led to the most important learning of my life. I'm a better person because of how you responded to my failures." We're all better when we're willing to grow from our mistakes, Madison. As the ceremony concluded, I found myself thinking about the long journey from that humiliating morning to this moment of celebration. The path hadn't been easy, but it had been necessary. Later that week, I received a letter addressed in shaky handwriting. Inside was a note from an elderly woman named Grace Palmer. "Dear Colonel Hayes, I am 92 years old and a Gold Star mother. My son died in Vietnam in 1969.
I have been following your story in the newspapers and wanted you to know how proud I am of the way you stood up for yourself and others. My son would have been proud too. You remind me that his sacrifice still matters, that there are still people willing to fight for what's right. Thank you for your service, both in uniform and out of it. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in my desk drawer alongside the Bronze Star and the dozens of other thank you notes I'd received. Each one represented a life touched, a perspective changed, a commitment to dignity reinforced. The following month brought news that our model was being implemented at healthcare facilities across 3 states. Veterans advocates were being hired, sensitivity training was becoming standard, and discrimination policies were being strengthened. But perhaps the most gratifying development was personal. My daughter called from California with news that she was moving back east to be closer to family. "Mom, I've been watching what is built there, how you've turned something so painful into something positive. I'm proud of you. Dad would be proud too." The mention of my late husband brought tears to my eyes. He had died 5 years into my military career, and I'd often wondered if the sacrifices we'd made as a family had been worth it. I think I finally understand something Dad used to say, that real victory isn't about defeating your enemies, it's about creating a world where the battles don't have to be fought again. On a quiet Sunday morning, 3 years after the incident, I stood in my kitchen making coffee and watching the sunrise through my window. My phone was silent, my schedule was clear, and for the first time in years, I felt genuinely at peace. The work continued, but it no longer felt like a battle. It felt like a mission, a calling, a way to ensure that service and sacrifice were honored not just in words and ceremonies, but with actions and changes that made life better for those who came after. I thought about Frank Delaney, the fictional colonel whose story had inspired thousands, and realized that fiction and reality weren't so different. Both were about the power of standing up when it would be easier to sit down, speaking out when it would be safer to stay silent, demanding dignity when others were willing to accept dismissal. The sunlight streaming through my window fell across the Bronze Star sitting on my kitchen table, catching the worn edges and faded ribbon. 3 generations of service, 3 different wars, 3 different kinds of courage, but the same unbreakable truth, that dignity defended anywhere is dignity defended everywhere, and sometimes one voice raised at the right moment can change the course of everything that follows. I picked up the medal and smiled, thinking about the young soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines who were serving right now, who would one day transition to civilian life, who might one day face their own moments of discrimination or dismissal. They would find a different world than the one I had encountered, a world where their service was not just honored in speeches and parades, but protected in the everyday moments that truly mattered. A world where dignity was not negotiable, respect was not optional, and every person who had worn the uniform would be seen not for what they looked like, but for who they were and what they had given. That was the real victory.
Not the recognition or the career, or even the personal vindication, but the knowledge that the battle I had fought would not have to be fought again. At least not in the same way. Not by someone else. Not on my watch. The morning light grew stronger, and I began preparing for another day of work, another opportunity to build bridges, another chance to ensure that dignity and respect remained more than just words carved into marble. Because that's what you do when you've taken an oath to serve. You keep serving, in whatever way you can, for as long as you're able. And you never ever leave a fellow warrior behind. 5 years had passed since that morning at the Millbrook Family Health Center, and the world looked different now, not just for me, but for countless others who had found their voices in the aftermath of mine. I was packing up my office for the last time, preparing to transition into full retirement. At 73, I had finally decided it was time to step back and let younger advocates carry the torch forward. My replacement, a former Air Force medic named Captain Lisa Rodriguez, had been shadowing me for months, learning the intricacies of healthcare advocacy and veteran relations. "Colonel, are you sure about this?" Lisa asked, watching me carefully wrap the bronze star that had become a symbol of our program. "The clinic won't be the same without you." "That's exactly the point, Captain. The program has grown beyond any one person. The changes we've made are embedded in the culture now, not dependent on my presence." Dr. Martinez knocked on the doorframe, carrying a bouquet of flowers and a thick manila envelope. "Patricia, I brought you something for your retirement." She handed me the envelope first. Inside were letters, dozens of them, from patients whose lives had been changed by the advocacy program, veterans who had received proper care, families who had felt welcomed instead of judged, healthcare workers who had discovered their own capacity for compassion. "The board wanted you to see the impact you've made," Dr. Martinez said softly. "These represent just a fraction of the lives you've touched." I pulled out one letter at random. It was from a young woman named Ashley, a Marine veteran who had been struggling with PTSD and had avoided seeking help because of past negative experiences in civilian healthcare settings. "Colonel Hayes," the letter read, "because of the safe space you created at Millbrook, I finally got the mental health treatment I needed. I'm married now, have a baby daughter, and I'm training to become a counselor so I can help other veterans the way you helped me. You saved my life, and through me, you're saving others." I felt tears building behind my eyes as I read letter after letter with similar themes. People who had found hope, dignity, and healing because someone had stood up and said, "This is not acceptable." Madison appeared in the doorway, now the clinic's director of patient relations and advocacy. "Colonel, the staff has gathered in the main conference room. We have a small farewell reception for you." As we walked through the hallways, I noticed how different the atmosphere was from that first difficult day. Staff members moved with purpose and warmth, greeting patients with genuine respect regardless of their appearance or background. The walls were decorated with artwork from local veterans, photos of community events, and testimonials from grateful patients. The conference room was packed, with faces I recognized. Eleanor, now the head of reception training. Dr. Reeves, who had become a champion for veteran healthcare initiatives. Dozens of staff members, patients, and community leaders who had been part of the transformation. Dr. Martinez stood to address the crowd. 5 years ago, an incident occurred at this clinic that could have destroyed us. Instead, because of one woman's courage and grace, it became the catalyst for the most meaningful changes in our institution's history. She gestured toward a plaque that had been mounted on the wall. "Today, we're dedicating the Patricia Hayes Center for Dignity in Healthcare, ensuring that future generations will understand that respect and compassion are not optional in medical care." The applause was warm and sustained, but what moved me most were the individual faces in the crowd. Eleanor, now the head of reception training. Dr. Reeves, who had become a champion for veteran healthcare initiatives. Dozens of staff members, patients, and community leaders who had been part of the transformation. Madison appeared in the doorway, now the clinic's director of patient relations and advocacy. "Colonel, the staff has gathered in the main conference room. We have a small farewell reception for you." As we walked through the hallways, I noticed how different the atmosphere was from that first difficult day. Staff members moved with purpose and warmth, greeting patients with genuine respect, regardless of their appearance or background. The walls were decorated with artwork from local veterans, photos of community events, and testimonials from grateful patients. The conference room was packed with faces I recognized. Eleanor, now the head of reception training. Dr. Reeves, who had become a champion for veteran healthcare initiatives. Dozens of staff members, patients, and community leaders who had been part of the transformation. Dr. Martinez stood to address the crowd. 5 years ago, an incident occurred at this clinic that could have destroyed us. Instead, because of one woman's courage and grace, It became the catalyst for the most meaningful changes in our institution's history. She gestured toward a plaque that had been mounted on the wall. Today, we're dedicating the Patricia Hayes Center for Dignity in Healthcare, ensuring that future generations will understand that respect and compassion are not optional in medical care. The applause was warm and sustained, but what moved me most were the individual faces in the crowd. Eleanor, now the head of reception training, Dr. Reeves, who had become a champion for veteran healthcare initiatives, dozens of staff members, patients, and community leaders who had been part of the transformation. Madison walked me to my car, offering the most profound reflection. "Colonel, I want you to know that what happened between us changed more than just this clinic. It changed me as a human being. I've taught my children about unconscious bias, about the importance of treating everyone with dignity. The lesson you taught me is now being passed down to the next generation." As I drove home through the familiar streets of Millbrook, I thought about legacy and how it's built not through grand gestures, but through daily choices to stand up for what's right. The incident that had humiliated me had become the foundation for a movement that extended far beyond one clinic, one community, one state. My phone buzzed with a text from my daughter. "Mom saw the news coverage of your retirement ceremony. So proud of how you turned your worst moment into your greatest achievement. Dad would be amazed at what you've built." That evening, I sat on my porch watching the sunset, the same view I'd had for years, but somehow more beautiful now. The bronze star sat on the table beside me, catching the last rays of sunlight. 3 generations of service, 3 different kinds of courage, all connected by the thread of standing up when it mattered most. A car pulled into my driveway, and I was surprised to see Captain Rodriguez getting out, carrying a small wrapped package. "Colonel, I hope you don't mind the intrusion. I wanted to give you this privately." She handed me the package, and inside I found a shadow box containing my military decorations, photos from my service years, and a new addition, a certificate recognizing my civilian service as a healthcare advocate, signed by the Governor of Connecticut. "The veteran community wanted you to have this. Your service didn't end when you took off the uniform. It just took a different form." After she left, I remained on the porch as darkness settled over the neighborhood. Tomorrow would bring new challenges for veterans seeking health care, new opportunities for bias and discrimination to rear their heads. But they would also bring advocates like Captain Rodriguez, healthcare workers trained in dignity and respect, and systems designed to protect rather than exclude. The work would continue without me, carried forward by people who understood that healthcare was not a privilege to be earned, but a right to be protected. The culture we had built would outlast any individual, embedded in policies and practices, and most importantly, in hearts and minds that had been changed. I thought about all the Colonel Hayeses yet to come, veterans who would face their own moments of discrimination and dismissal. They would find a different world than the one I had encountered. Not perfect, but better. They would find allies where I had found adversaries, support where I had faced silence, dignity where I had been denied basic respect. That was the real victory, not the recognition or the programs or even the personal vindication, but the knowledge that the next person who needed help would find it more easily because of the stand we had taken. As I prepared to go inside, my phone rang one last time. The caller ID showed a number from California. "Is this Colonel Patricia Hayes?" "This is Patricia Hayes, yes." "Ma'am, my name is Lieutenant Sarah Kim, U.S. Army. I'm transitioning out of service next month, and I've been reading about your advocacy work. I'm moving to Connecticut for a civilian job, and I was wondering if you could give me advice about navigating health."
"Ma'am, you need to step aside." The receptionist's voice cut through the waiting room like a blade. "This is a private clinic. The county health department is 2 miles down Elm Street." Her eyes swept over my faded jacket, my worn sneakers, the way I clutched my insurance card like it might disappear. They handle walk-ins for people who need assistance. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I stood there frozen as 20 pairs of eyes turned toward me. The silence was deafening. A mother pulled her daughter closer. A businessman in a crisp suit suddenly found his phone fascinating. The message was clear. I didn't belong here. I never thought I'd be the kind of person someone would look at and assume couldn't afford health care. 23 years in the United States Army, retiring as a full colonel, and somehow I'd become invisible in a way that had nothing to do with military tactics and everything to do with how the world saw a middle-aged woman in clothes that had seen better days. It was Tuesday morning, October 15th, and the autumn air in Millbrook, Connecticut carried the kind of chill that settled into old injuries. I'd driven 40 minutes from my small apartment in Riverside to the Millbrook Family Health Center because my primary care physician had recommended it. Dr. Peterson had specifically mentioned this clinic when I'd called about getting my annual flu shot, especially important given my compromised immune system from treatments I'd been receiving. The parking lot should have been my first warning. Row after row of pristine SUVs, luxury sedans, cars that cost more than my annual disability payment. My 15-year-old Honda Civic, with its faded blue paint and the dent in the rear bumper from when I'd backed into a post during a particularly difficult day, looked like it had wandered into the wrong neighborhood. But I'd made the appointment. I had insurance. I belonged here as much as anyone else. The clinic itself was impressive, all glass and steel and modern architecture that spoke of money and exclusivity. Inside, the waiting room resembled a high-end hotel lobby more than a medical facility. Leather chairs arranged around mahogany tables, original artwork on the walls, a coffee station that offered organic fair trade options alongside bottled water that probably cost more than my lunch. I approached the reception desk with my insurance card ready, my appointment confirmation printed and folded neatly in my jacket pocket. The woman behind the counter, blonde hair pulled back in a perfect chignon, manicured nails clicking against her keyboard, barely glanced up. "Name?" she asked, her tone already suggesting this was an inconvenience. "Colonel Patricia Hayes," I said, then caught myself. Old habits. "Patricia Hayes. I have an appointment at 10:30 for a flu vaccination." She paused her typing, her eyes finally lifted to take me in. I watched her gaze travel from my face down to my jacket, a military surplus store find that I'd bought because it was warm and functional, not because it was fashionable. Her expression shifted almost imperceptibly, the kind of micro-expression you learn to read when you've spent decades managing personnel and assessing situations. "Patricia Hayes," she repeated, fingers flying over the keyboard. A frown creased her perfectly made-up features. "I'm not seeing an appointment under that name." I reached for my confirmation. "I called last week, spoke with someone named Jennifer. She scheduled me for 10:30 with Dr. Reeves." The receptionist, whose nameplate read Madison, took the paper and studied it with the kind of scrutiny usually reserved for forged documents. "This confirmation number isn't showing up in our system, and Dr. Reeves doesn't typically handle walk-in vaccinations." "I'm not a walk-in. I have an appointment." "Ma'am, our flu shot program is designed for our established patients, patients who maintain regular care relationships with our providers." The words were carefully chosen, polite on the surface but loaded with implication. Behind me, I could hear the soft murmur of other patients being checked in seamlessly. A woman in a designer coat confirmed her appointment with Dr. Steinberg. A man in a three-piece suit was handed a clipboard and directed to the premium seating area near the windows. "I have insurance," I said, placing my card on the counter. "Blue Cross Blue Shield, Federal Employee Plan." Madison examined the card like it might bite her. Ma'am, we do accept most insurance plans, but there can be complications with certain types of coverage. Sometimes it's easier to go somewhere that specializes in, she paused, searching for the right words, more straightforward billing situations. That's when she said it, the words that would replay in my mind for days afterward. Ma'am, you need to step aside. This is a private clinic. The county health department is 2 miles down Elm Street. They handle walk-ins for people who need assistance. The waiting room seemed to contract around me. Conversations stopped, magazines lowered. Even the soft jazz playing through the speakers seemed to fade into an uncomfortable silence. I felt my face flush hot, then cold. In all my years of service, through deployments in Iraq and Afghanistan, through the challenges of being one of the few women in senior military leadership, I had never felt quite like this. Small, dismissed, judged not for my actions or my character, but for the appearance of my bank account. "There has been a mistake," I said, my voice steady despite the humiliation burning in my chest. "I have an appointment. I have insurance. I need to speak with a supervisor." Madison's smile never wavered, but it hardened around the edges. "Ma'am, I am the supervisor for front desk operations. I understand this can be frustrating, but our clinic maintains certain protocols to ensure we can provide the highest level of care to our patients." Our patients, not patients like me. I looked around the waiting room, taking in the faces that had turned away, the sudden fascination with phones and magazines. A woman near the window whispered something to her husband, who glanced in my direction before quickly looking away. A teenager rolled her eyes and muttered something under her breath. "Please lower your voice," she said, though I hadn't raised it. "We have other patients waiting, and this kind of disruption isn't appropriate for our environment." That's when I understood. This wasn't about my appointment or my insurance or a computer glitch. This was about the assumption that someone who looked like me, dressed like me, drove a car like me, couldn't possibly belong in a place like this. I thought about my service record, the Bronze Star sitting in a box in my closet, the commendation letters from generals and senators, the 23 years of my life I'd given to protecting the freedom of people like the ones staring at me now with such obvious distaste. I thought about the battles I'd fought overseas, the decisions I'd made that had saved lives and shaped missions, the respect I'd commanded from soldiers under my leadership, regardless of their background or economic status. And here I stood, in a medical clinic in suburban Connecticut, being told I didn't belong because my jacket was faded and my car was old. "I'll wait," I said quietly, moving toward an empty chair in the corner. "Ma'am, as I explained, without a confirmed appointment in our system, we can't—" "I'll wait," I repeated, my voice carrying just enough of my old command tone to cut through her protests. I settled into a leather chair that probably cost more than my monthly rent, and tried to ignore the stares, the whispers, the palpable discomfort of people who clearly believed the space around them had been contaminated by my presence.